Hey everyone, I am Kate Adam. I appreciate you guys joining us this afternoon or this evening, depending on where you are. I'm joined today with Mike Spanbauer, who you heard from earlier, as well as Bob Tafoya. All of us are from Juniper Networks and serving, usually wearing multiple different hats, but the specialty here obviously is critical infrastructure. And so we're going to be talking about with this session, and we want to encourage ask questions, make comments. This is a conversation to further discuss how to create a protection plan for critical infrastructure. What are those components, expanding on the points that Mike made this morning on open standards, on layered intelligence, and on securing throughout the entire network, every port, every flow, every process. Why are those important, and what do those look like practically speaking? And we're here to also answer your questions. So let's kick it off. Bob, Mike, thank you guys so much for joining me today in this challenge session / fireside chat. Although there are no fires around us currently, although unfortunately, I think there are fires in multiple places in the world today, at the moment.
Knock wood, yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone is staying safe. Hopefully you both are staying safe as well.
So far, so good.
Yeah, but I think this brings up an interesting, I think an interesting point too about critical infrastructure, right? In terms of, not just the environment that's changing physically, but also digitally, right? With OT and IT converging, as Mike discussed this morning, but also in the risk tolerance that critical infrastructure by design can and cannot handle. And so in creating a protection plan, right, let's touch on the first one, right? Let's touch on the first point that Mike, you made this morning with regard to visibility. What you were saying is open standards, right? Avoid vendor lock-in. And I guess it's funny coming from us because we're from one vendor, but Bob, I want to pitch this to you. Why is that important? The vendor lock-in, avoiding that, why is that important for critical infrastructure? Why is it a good thing to do?
Yeah, there's so many answers to that question. The fact of the matter is I don't believe that any one vendor is going to be able to solve all your problems is number one. That a robust ecosystem of partners working together in a common purpose to, for example, secure the edge of your secure critical infrastructure environment is another. And if it's properly built out, those connection points, those interoperable exchanges of information, assuming that you have the data structure in place with the appropriate bits and pieces of data that are flowing, it's actually, it's just a fantastic scalable solution for providing information and having eyes and ears much deeper into the critical infrastructure edge than we currently do.
Yeah, and the hardware manufacturers, let's just forget for a second about the network and the security piece and just talk about the operational technology that's being deployed, right? Those manufacturers, right? They're not the same manufacturers as the folks like us who create the networking infrastructure, who create the security infrastructure, right? And so, just from the get-go, you really do need to have the interoperability that you don't, your people don't have to spend extra cycles making happen, right? I know firsthand the manual effort involved in making something integrate that isn't purposely built to integrate, is not open. It sucks.
It could be very time consuming, and I'm sure that we'll get into this, but the solutions that we've come up with are usually multi-vendor. They're from the very get-go, and we did that for a reason. And we don't integrate, we interoperate, and there's a difference there.
Can you explain that difference? I want to just make sure that's clear, because I think those two words are things that are intermingled and there's a nuance as you just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess I can just say out loud now that we participated in a funding opportunity from the Department of Energy. It started way back in 2018. And we are working with SEL, Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and Dragos to build out a multi-vendor infrastructure solution, architecture solution for edge modernization. So, an inclusive of in that is the SEL Ethernet fabric, which is their OT-SDN Ethernet fabric. And of course, there's the Dragos sensors that are looking for attacks and threats in the industrial control systems environment. Now, we had to come up with a way to talk to each other without building a whole bunch of overly complicated. As a matter of fact, our goal was to stay as simplified as possible. So we're not using APIs and saying, okay, these are the questions you can ask me and I'll answer, and you can write scripts to do with what you will. We're as a matter of fact, we have just very, very consistently and we should say somewhat narrowly define what the data structure is of the information that we're passing back and forth to each other, so that it is an interchange that happens very quickly. And then we do all the securing of that infrastructure, both, I mean, like literally from the physical level up to the point where we're authenticating every packet that's flowing.
Yeah, I just posted the announcement that's on bpa.gov as of this morning on Project Ambassador. I know it's been a labor of love for sure for us, yes, for our partners Dragos and SEL. But I would. This is your baby, Bob. I mean, critical infrastructure is your game, right? Mm-hmm. Could you just give a little bit of background to Project Ambassador, how this project came about? And Mike, I know you and I were both involved in these conversations with Bob, at least a year ago, more than a year ago now. Gosh, time flies.
Sure.
Pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, exactly. Oh, yes.
I can't remember back that far. But this is not something, Project Ambassador is not something that was just kind of a spur of the moment, hey, let's do this, right? It was very carefully planned and thought out. And, there were multiple stakeholders outside of our 3 partner companies, yes, who created this. Describe that process, because I think this is a really, a very appropriate solution set and partnership for this, for critical infrastructure, for this audience, and for creating a protection plan.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Way back when, and this actually stretches all the way back to 2016, I approached SEL. We were introduced to SEL when I was still being a kind of individual contributor as a frontline major account manager for some utilities, investor-owned utilities here in Southern California, where I live. And SEL and Juniper have an interesting set of overlaps. We tend to be engineering-driven companies. We tend to do being very, just very good about our engineering. And so there was an opportunity to work together before any kind of funding mechanism showed up. But we weren't going anywhere. We were just kind of going sideways. Really great ideas, very interesting conversations, all the way up to our executive level. Their one-time COO, Dave Whitehead, who is now the CEO, would talk to Rami, I believe, in 2017, Rami Rahim of our CEO at Juniper. When the funding opportunity came around from the Department of Energy, as they typically do every 3 to 4 years, we jumped on a opportunity or a funding topic that had to do with using cloud native technologies to improve the cybersecurity and agility, read orchestration and automation of grid communications. And with that, we decided to build not just an ecosystem that included Juniper's wide area network and data center and security offerings, but also SEL's Ethernet OT SDN offerings. So we had a forwarding plane made up of Juniper. We had a cybersecurity plane made up of Juniper, but the Juniper cybersecurity plane kind of ended at the edge of the substation. So we actually SEL brought Dragos into the equation, and Dragos has been a great partner. And they, they have sensors that live in the industrial control system environment, and they have just world-class threat analytics and behavioral analytics, and they have fingerprinted some bad guys like dark side, and they know what their tactics and procedures are, and they pay a lot of attention to it. And they have some really wonderful experts who are ex-NSA and ex-three-letter acronym companies that are just really, really expert in these, not only nation state but non-nation state actors who are causing a lot of issues these days. So Dragos really extended our reach and our eyes and ears into the infrastructure within a substation. And as we move forward to modernize that from serially based, circuit based kind of communications with old interfaces, and in some cases unprotected firmware that's out there that might be used to exploit some or cause some nasty exploits, we are moving towards a packet-based infrastructure based on 61850 for those of you out there who are geeking out with me. And Dragos offers up this wonderful, indications of compromise that we're able to actually take action on. We're able to get them back and ingest them into our security director software, and specifically exercise our policy enforcement engine, which allows us to take action on only the very most critical level 5 kind of alerts from Dragos. The only thing that we would ever take, people get very nervous when you start talking about taking action in a control system.
Yeah, do not bring down.
No.
Do not bring down services, whatever you do, right? Which is why, to your point, why there are so many systems that are unpatched. You can't, right?
Right. First, do no harm, right? And right. But if there's a fast-moving east-west attack, if we've seen multiple login failures followed by a spike in traffic on a line that's supposed to be, spitting out, SCADA data 4 times a second, or some SCADA registers 4 times a second, and suddenly it's transferring a gig of data, there might be a problem, right? So, and Dragos has a wonderful system for detecting that and then making us aware of it, and we can take actions via policy enforcement so that we can either quarantine or potentially even block that IP address.
Yeah, and I think Dragos, the intelligence piece, right, that Dragos brings to the solution, but also, like as you mentioned, they're just amazing, right? Mike, you touched on this morning as well, right? There's intelligence, right? There's alerts with context, and that's intelligence. You have to have the entire context to really understand, is this something that I need to take action on? Is this something that it hasn't gotten to that point yet? And that determining where that line is going to be different for every organization, right? It's very different, and even within different parts of the OT environment, that tolerance is probably going to be a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. But getting to the intelligence portion and having that step 2, having the layered intelligence, having the context to be able to draw a definitive conclusion. Yes, this is compromised, and that compromise equals this risk level that I cannot tolerate, or I can tolerate a little bit more. Determining where that is super important. And so the threat intelligence piece, that is the second part of the strategy for laying out a protection plan. Is where are you getting intelligence? How are you using that intelligence? How are you correlating that intelligence together to determine that, that risk threshold, and that leads to the next piece, which is enforcement. But Mike, could you expand a little bit on that context needed, right? Bob, to your point, the point you just made, there's a lot of pieces, there's a lot of different artifacts that go into that, getting to that black or white decision. Yes, this is an infection. No, it is not. This is just an anomaly. I need more info.
Yeah, certainly. No, I think it's a fantastic question, Kate. It really gets to the heart of, whether we do or don't act, with a decisive outcome, or whether we continue to observe to ensure we know what we're doing. So before I touch on that, though, one thing to close on the open piece that actually feeds into this, and that's the context, is that in the OT world, right, you oftentimes have elements that have survived vastly longer refresh cycles than in any information organization that I've ever consulted with, right? Whereas in the world of PCs, servers, apps, users, mobile devices, 3 to 5 years, and you're starting to get a little antiquated, right? 7 years, and I can't believe that's still running. In 10 years, wow, that's cool. I think my dad had one of those, right? You start getting jokes because the age is a little excessive. But of course, in the world of OT, the time spans we're dealing with, the installed and deployed technologies are measured in decades. And so being mindful that the standards continue to work backwards and forwards, and supporting the data ingestion, right, from all of this material is crucial. And that gets to the context point of this information's useless without context, which then becomes intelligence. Knowing exactly how the device is to behave and documenting that, as well as knowing how to act on these indicators, right? Whether that be on the individual endpoint or in transit across the environment. Right? All of these factors kind of surface through the capture of network telemetry and all this intelligence material, and together with good analytics and feeds, you can discern whether additional investigation is required, or in some cases it's evident that there's a ransomware action underway, and just drop it, right? If there's a command and control, for example, call that's going out, I don't need to wait for permission because it's on a PC node that isn't actually in the active data and or utilities path, right? The control side is in time at times together, and being able to discern which of the two components of the organization are being affected, as well as the outcome that could be ultimately achieved is what drives that decision. And that gets back to your risk point, right? Knowing what your tolerance is before you're in the moment is critical. And so each organization.
What you're describing is threat modeling.
It is, exactly. The threat modeling in the context of OT is a little, I think, unique, and the security workflow, right? It's both pieces of it. Absolutely. So knowing what you'll plan to do before it happens is always the better way to approach a threat scenario, because trying to make wise decisions in the moment. I mean, there's certainly incidents that we've all read about over the last number of years that are outcomes that were reactive as opposed to sort of prepared for and responded to, and no one wants to be in that reactive mode. You'll always want to be in the response mode. The difference is intelligence drives what occurs next. So that's really the key, and context is the most valuable piece of that equation.
On that note too, I mean, how do people, right? Because we talk about technology, right? We are a technology vendor, but there's the trifecta of people, process, and technology, and people are a massive component. You cannot A, develop a protection plan, or B, execute it appropriately without people there actually doing the smart work, to put it very simply. How do people and ops teams, architect teams, networking teams, how do the people factor into that intelligence component, as you mentioned, right? Going from a reactive mode to a response mode. What are the roles of the people? What are the roles of the stakeholders when in A, developing a plan, and B, when you have to enact that plan, what roles do they have to play? What's their stake in the game? How does that work?
That is a very big question, Kate. So I'll do my best to keep it succinct, and I'll ask Bob to contribute as well, because I think there's some specific roles that Bob's worked closely with, and can add considerable color. But really, there's a number of actors in an organization that has to be involved in the development of the plan as well as in the response motion. You've got the operations team themselves that are responsible for the systems and ultimately their uptime, right? So cybersecurity is this thing that could affect them, but their core need, they're the technicians, the engineers, and the the monitoring gurus that are watching for the fingerprints of something not behaving correctly. Some of it's easier than others, right? There's obviously improvements in monitoring and sensor technologies that we've had over the last decade or two that help. But in the case of Norsk, right, where they basically flipped off the IT switches when they had the ransomware outage, and they basically brought in all the vets that knew exactly how to bring the systems back up manually and recover, over a measured time period, right? Having that insight, that knowledge and awareness of what the systems are to behave like is that operational side that I believe is crucial for this plan development and the technologies, right? Taking advantage of the innovators and the innovations that have been made available, that have been proven to be reliable, accurate, and support that motion. And obviously, there's also the organizational side have potentially regulatory demands and commits that are dictated to or required of an organization to meet, right? Whether they be energy service levels or water, whatever the venue and the particular infrastructure we're talking about are, who may not at all understand the technology, but they certainly know what kind of uptimes and targets that must be achieved. And so they would in turn potentially influence or determine what's acceptable risk, right? So, those are some of the examples of groups, but I know Bob's he's got more experience even than I after a decade here.
Well,
so
I'm sitting here thinking it's kind of interesting, the architecture that we built that within the confines or the context of Project Ambassador was to first and foremost do no harm, and control data is fascinating because control data is only really interesting when it's anomalous, right? So there, you have to do something when it triggers an action, and you hope to never see it either. And as a matter of fact, we really would like to have, to your point about the length of time for between refresh cycles, the operation size like to put something in place and leave it for 20 or 30 years. And you know what? An RS-232 cable moves data pretty darn well, especially the kind of data it just does, right? And now, by the way, how do you take that and those requirements and take it and use Ethernet and IP to reduce your overall costs and improve your cybersecurity environment or your cybersecurity stance, while doing exactly what that cable has always done? What is the virtual equivalent of that cable? And I would argue that it is, and by the way, the cable is usually stretched across a SONET network as well, or something like that, so that it, some kind of pseudo-wire environment it gets all the way back to. So how do you engineer that? Our whole goal is to professionally engineer an environment or a circuit, I should say, circuit by circuit, based on the fingerprint of that circuit. So I want an L2 circuit between substation 4 and substation 5, and it has to have a certain QoS environment or QoS capability, and it's going to be very fast, right? It's going to get the top level QoS, and it needs to have less than 4 milliseconds of one-way delay, and that needs to be tested, probably tested more than once, right? Let's continuously test it. And let's make sure that we have things that look as much like remedial action schemes that utilities already have in place for their electrical grid environment, so they don't shut down full feeders. And let's try to do as much as we can to emulate that at the lower cost of Ethernet with much better cybersecurity. So that's the problem that we took on because, clearly we're gluttons for punishment, right? So, from a lot of perspectives, I think that we've done a fair job of getting there. Not the least of which is using both the WAN controller from Juniper and an OT SDN LAN controller from SEL, placing them in an environment where they can exchange information such that a circuit can be implemented, instantiated from the control center to the device being a relay, a cap bank controller, a whatever it is that needs to be sending out its telemetry and its control. So, and if we do that, and we say, we know exactly the circuit, we know exactly the protocols on that circuit. If we build a SCADA circuit, it should be DNP3, it should be a timing protocol, it should be SSH, and if anything else shows up, it should be dropped on the ground. You know, and then we fingerprint that and put it under surveillance, not under monitoring, under surveillance. Then we know we've kind of taken the IT notion of dynamic protocols and, you know, flooding and convergence and all the rest of that stuff, and kind of put it on its head and saying, no, we're actually going to drill a hole through that block of marble, and we're going to insert a string, and we're going to put two cans on either side, and that's the only conversation that particular endpoint is going to be able to have. So I ramble a little bit because I get excited about this stuff, but yeah, that's what we do. We're lowering our cybersecurity footprint and acting as much like the electrical system as we can possibly be.
Yeah, and I think you teased on one point that I did not mention, Bob, which is where back to your stakeholders question, particularly, okay, is going to be the finance or budget, you know, group, right? So as a crucial stakeholder, right, you know, they're in part of this, you know, they're negotiating with, you know, with the organization, right, based on the technical requirements, objectives, outcomes, and so forth, because they're also going to set the schedule. And, you know, as we know, it's easy to dream up a brilliant architecture that could solve world hunger and, you know, connect every continent at multi-terabit connection speeds, but there ain't a checkbook big enough. And so the reality is that most of the time these projects are parsed into consumable chunks that frankly can be operationally deployed, hardened, iteratively, you know, tested, and made sure to deliver on, you know, the operational requirements. And so you're looking at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year timeline in some cases, because if you're talking 5,000 substations, right, some of the conversations we've had have been numerous endpoints and technologies. And so, you know, having a measured plan ensures that you have all of the, you know, the various kind of groups engaged across the organization so that they have a say. And from there, you can set the priorities and sort of weight the asks accordingly. But all that factors into the plan.
Couldn't agree more.
Real quick, so we have some questions from the audience, which thank you guys for submitting those. So the first one from Farouk: how do you recommend switching from primary production environments to backup seamlessly?
Do you want to start with that one, Mike?
You know, seamlessly. Let's talk about as resiliently as possible. So, to me, seamless conveys absolutely, you know, no interrupt. And I think there's a lot of considerations that go into that to support, you know, seamless continuity. So you know, delivering on this is going to be, you know, clustered entities, right? Resilient circuits. You've got to have the ability to fail over between while not taking a single service impact, or finding that one magic window every third year where there's a blue moon, you know, in a month that, you know, doesn't end in Y. So, you know, the challenges are that you have a very narrow window if you don't have the resilience and structure, you know, to really handle it. And so in terms of the backup failover and so forth, you know, back to that planning exercise, ensuring that you do have that resilient or backup mechanic engineer or architect to the links to the sites, to the services that supports it. Frankly, the switching between is reasonably, you know, low impact. It's setting it up the first time where the heavy lift is often, you know, involved. And so it'd be on a case by case, but I think, you know, it's going to be assessing, back to that plan, how to stand up the parallel entity, the parallel instancing, and really, you know, cutting over, or you know, testing rather, that you know, the cutover would be impact less.
Yeah, and that's one of those the failover, the HA failover capabilities. Honestly, I would put that back on the vendor to show you that they can do that.
Absolutely.
without any service interruption, right?
Yeah,
that has to be a requirement.
Yeah, no,
Right.
I don't disagree. Stateful preservation is easy to write on a data sheet. Delivering at scale, this is a whole different matter. And so, absolutely proving and demonstrating that there's absolutely no service impact while delivering on the service levels that Bob mentioned a moment ago that the control circuits are monitoring for or surveilling for.
Surveilling, exactly.
So
yeah.
those targets are non-trivial. To do so in a high availability, failure scenario is, again, having done networking infrastructure design for near 30 years, is non-trivial. So I don't know, Bob, you want to add anything?
Working from the edge in, I can only tell you that something that has become very clear to us is that when you're using an OT, let's just say a SDN controller, and you're controlling your switches that way, you can instantiate those flows with their backup and their backup paths in place, and that ensures a sub-microsecond failover, so that control traffic is never dropped on the ground, and that's just once again, first do no harm. That's why we have to keep that flowing in all cases. And that is why, we kind of at the edge think that the use of, let's just say, spanning tree protocols or rapid spanning tree protocols are quite dangerous, because when they do have to go through a convergence, it's 30 milliseconds, and 30 milliseconds is a lifetime. When you're talking about the safety and reliability of the electrical grid. So it's I just had to throw that out there because we match that capability within the substation and within the Ethernet fabric with a capability using segment routing on the wide area network, so that it has its primary backup and tertiary path already established, and cutover is sub-millisecond.
Awesome, thanks guys. And then there's another question here. What are some of the challenges in building a BCP framework, especially with workers being remote? When we were talking, the three of us were talking before this session, one of the things that we were talking about, it goes back to the importance of not integration but interoperability, and being able to work in a multi-vendor environment. Bob, you want to take this one?
I'm going to have to ask what BCP stands for. I apologize.
Business continuity planning.
Oh, okay. The challenge of actually, I have to be honest with you. So the business continuity planning that we work with within the confines of Project Ambassador are to keep control traffic flowing so that there's no interruptions to the reliability and safety of the electrical grid. And I would say that the interesting part about that architecture is it's not in any way novel. As a matter of fact, it looks a lot like an RS-232 cable, right? It's very reliable. It does rather dumb, but very fast. And I think that the only other point that I'd layer on top of this is that architecture can be picked up and put on other, let's just say, critical infrastructure use cases. For example, traffic lights that have video cameras on the top of them, or ports that have physical security and video security, and also ship to shore cranes, these OT environments. So I think that the best way to ensure business continuity is to have just a rock solid, in many cases like non-hackable environment at the edge that is by its very nature kind of dumb. I know what you're going to say. Everything's back.
So I spent a fair bit of time doing red exercises and finding holes that the whole prospect of unhackable is I wish it existed, let's just say. But the question is a good one, and I think you actually were indeed addressing a particularly important point, Bob, that we do have to think about these problems and the access methods in different contexts than we had in the past. And this prospect of, well, we're all remote at the moment. I'm hopeful to be traveling soon. We'll see. But by and large, for both hiring, to find the right talent now, you have to have the flexibility of hiring wherever they live. And that may mean that, in fact, your ops lead, or at least one of your key technicians, is going to be located, not a dozen miles away, not 100 miles away, but further. So having remote access mechanics and surveillance technologies that augment the ability to observe the environment and to do that secondary investigation, should the primary links fail or what have you, is going to be crucial. And so thinking through these challenges of access and potentially not even having physical availability is crucial. And I think there was a similar question that came this morning, and a scenario that I provided was that in deep sea rigs, 12,000 feet down in the Gulf of Mexico, there is no hands-on for sensor mechanics that go a little sideways and without citing any incidents or anything else. I think the fact is that troubleshooting them is often an incredibly complex problem, and that is really a kind of parallel to this prospect of remote work that we find ourselves in, because you have to think through that access mechanic and what will be needed should something not go according to plan, so that you have some secondary measure, some fail safe, some risk mitigation mechanic, so that your remote workers can be effective remotely versus having to roll a truck, or in the case of that example, or a sub, which was unmanned. So yeah, indeed, it's a complicated problem to think through.
Yeah.
Go
and
ahead,
I would
Bob.
just add, I would only add that yeah, rolling people in trucks is expensive, time consuming, and I don't know a nice way of saying this. Humans get a little bit distracted. They get tired, and they make mistakes. And I don't think any two humans have ever configured a router the same way, right? They always have some kind of trick or interesting way of doing it. So, but the other part of our overall solution is very, very automation forward. We're using templates and pub sub buses and standardized models for layer 2 and layer 3 circuits, so that we can actually build based on knowledge of the wide area network and of the current state of the wide area network, the near real time current state of the wide area network, so that things like placement of a circuit or an LSP can be done automatically, scripted in a scripted manner, tested, pre-validated, post-validated, and then tested in a way that our friends the humans don't do so well. So one of the things that I follow is the number of what are called misoperations by the North American Electrical Reliability Corporation, otherwise known as NERC, and they publish these numbers at the end of the year, and these misoperations that take place within the electrical grid are, a relay failed, an arc happened, something happened, but nearly 40% of those misoperations are from mistakes in configuration, and that's just really the way that we're doing things right now with this IT/OT divide is very expensive, and it's pretty error prone too. So we need to solve for two problems there, and we believe we have.
I would also going back to not just challenges, but there are actually some benefits to workers being remote, right? In building a business continuity plan and a framework, right? There are a lot of very talented people who, you're basically, your hiring pool gets a lot wider, right? Because your people can work from anywhere with the technology that is available, right? With the automation that's available as well. But also that means that the folks who are collaborating to build this plan, you're going to have a lot more interesting ideas, right? your brainstorming of what to do when, and how to keep things running no matter what, but also make sure that again, nothing brings down those substations, nothing brings down those services. You have a lot more people from different backgrounds who are able to contribute to that plan. And so this is something that we talk about a lot in security, is there's a huge shortage of cybersecurity professionals, and the open recs for security across the board there's over 1 million unfulfilled headcount right now. But the interest in security, I'm speaking generally now, not just for critical infrastructure. The interest in cybersecurity has been growing, and some of those barriers to entering the field have been coming down, right? A lot of the folks who are, top of the field, who are considered, the best of the best, your senior person, the person that you go to when you're like, I don't know, is this a threat? And what kind of threat is it? That person you go to likely learned on the job. And so one of the things that actually is close to my heart, and I have to plug this here because I think it's important if we're actually going to fill those gaps, fill that unfulfilled headcount, and bring people up to speed, make security mainstream, get your executive stakeholders speaking and understanding the language of security, is getting more folks involved from different backgrounds, because they're going to be able to communicate effectively, brainstorm new interesting ideas, innovate. So the Diana initiative, actually, there's a summit that we are sponsoring on Friday and Saturday, the Diana Initiative Summit. And the whole purpose of the Diana Initiative is to break down those gates that have traditionally been up with regard to getting into security, right? Across the board, all industries. So making sure that if you have an interest, regardless of your current skill level, there are resources, there are mentors, there are exercises for you that are inexpensive or free of charge, that are made available through the Diana Initiative. And so if you have people on your teams, if you yourself are interested in learning more about red team operations, about blue team or purple team, honestly, operations, about how to become more resilient, how to understand more about cybersecurity, admission for the Diana Initiative, it's all virtual, it's $5. And the whole purpose is to, hey, let's bring security to the masses, right? If you are at all interested, we're here for you. And honestly, I'm super excited about it. Some of my very favorite security professionals are going to be speaking and teaching. There are boot camps for any skill level, no skill level. And the initiatives like this and events like this can only help the security industry, can only help security operations, and can only help to create a better, more resilient protection plan, not just for critical infrastructure, but across the board in really any industry. I'm always a huge proponent of, if you have a different background than me, you bring something interesting to the table. Let's talk about it. Let's throw ideas around, right? You don't have the same brain restrictions that someone who maybe has been in the industry for a very long time may have. You may see things with fresh eyes. So I have to make a plug because it's near and dear to my heart. And it honestly, if you're looking for people, this is a great place to recruit security professionals of all skill levels. Just FYI. I'll pop the link in the chat for you guys. Again, tickets are $5. Yeah, break down those gates, right?
Yeah, but I think though that's an important point, because the people portion of this construct is a critical piece, as we already noted, for the continuity planning, as well as just an effective cyber strategy. But stepping up one level even. We have a shared interest, right? Regardless of which segment, sector, geo, or political leaning you are, right? Cyber attacks are not, generally, focused on one specific entity, and really the technologies, tactics, and techniques that are involved in order to really both identify and to address these challenges are the similar thought processes. So you can leverage expertise from other areas to help you build a better plan, and really at the end of the day, leverage the experience of other organizations, and read between the lines there to avoid some of the mistakes that others have made before, and to avoid those and have the most efficient, operationally clean and executable outcomes that are achievable. And to me, that's what drives me, right? Is helping organizations solve the hardest problems before them, and solving those in ways that are operationally feasible, right? Teams that can then achieve and deliver on the technology stacks that do, in fact, decrease their risk exposure, and increase their responsiveness to any threat, any attack, anything that may come, because you can never predict tomorrow, but you can certainly prepare well for anything that may come. And that's the distinction. So I agree.
So the last part of this protection plan from this morning, right, is on the enforcement side. And one of the interesting things about what you were talking about, Mike, on enforcement is secure it all, secure all the things. But I think what you're getting at is your security enforcement mechanisms are not limited to a firewall in whatever form that may take, are not limited to an endpoint agent, which critical infrastructure you honestly are not going to be able to have, right? And so I want to get into the enforcement piece and leveraging the existing networking infrastructure to extend those enforcement capabilities. Like yourself, Mike, that the networking and security convergence is something that I've been keen on, making happen myself, right? I've been excited about it for a long time. And now that it's finally coming to fruition, I mean, we can talk about SASE as kind of the cloud delivered embodiment of networking and security converging. But for an OT environment, I think this is where it especially becomes important, because the tools that you have at your fingertips, your security tools, are not the same. And the flexibility is not the same at all that you have in the IT environment.
Now, I mean, you touched on a couple of things, and I think the simplest point. So I by no means advocate that you do not need a firewall. It is the first line of enforcement, and frankly, the most capable technology that you can have in your environment. I didn't mean to imply the other, but indeed, it's not the only tool. Right. You need effective endpoint technologies, whatever that may be. x86, ARM, RISC, etc. Right? There's a host of chips that have come before us, and certainly more will come after. And the right technologies will be dependent on specifically, what interfaces, what HMIs are out there, etc. Right? All the elements within the environment that are required to be effectively observed, and then intelligence captured and gathered and rendered on, finally through to some graceful method of enforcement. And I use that word because it's about being surgically specific on what the right operation or action should be, instead of the old nuclear approach where the blast radius becomes the entire network segment. That's not the right answer in practically any scenario, regardless of the environment. And so having the means to drop the port, or even the specific session on an endpoint is that level of control and enforceability that I think is needed. And I think, to Bob's point earlier, being able to do so at the speed of threats as opposed to the speed of humans. That's the distinction where automation plays a crucial role, because an actor can execute a campaign and ultimately achieve the objective in now the space of less than 2 hours on average for a lot of the threats. Right? It used to be days, weeks, months. It doesn't mean that they don't dwell in the environment for longer, but when they pull the trigger and begin to send indicators that clearly indicate something's off, it could be very little time that you get to act. And automation is key, and having the tools and the rest of the planning indicators that let you arrive at the right intelligence to then derive that enforcement. That's the difference between being a headline and being, able to, clap each other on the back. Dang, that was, an awesome response, but we thwarted whatever it is. I wish it were easy to do all this, just with a snap of a finger. But there are certainly partners out in the community, ourselves and others that do, serve this purpose to help find that path. Bob, I don't know if, I know you share similar perspectives, so.
Yeah, no, I do. I just, the thought is coming from the background of critical infrastructure, though, there is still a remarkable resistance to the use of the cloud, and it just is what it is. And I think that we'll get there in time, and I think that there's going to be value propositions that are so irresistible that it does have a purpose, and it does have a function, and it does have a value, and it's just gonna take a moment.
So I'll counter that with, I don't disagree at all, but I think that you can leverage the cloud without it being the point of enforcement and still manage to stay within the risk profiles of most organizations, right? The conservative disposition. So you can leverage intelligence and aggregation, right? Heuristics, analytics, things that can only be done with cloud available compute and the elasticity offered. Frankly, you just don't want to deploy the kind of server iron to do, or big firewalls. And from that, arrive at an outcome, a verdict that is then able to be acted on if desired, in a local context. And that's where those experts, those engineers are going to be remote and need to be able to access, the link, the monitoring node, whatever is infected or impacted, and take action. And so again, there's no prescriptive, this is the way. I'm not wearing that shirt today, but the Mandalorian, the point being that there's multiple paths, multiple ways, and ensuring that the right controls are available for the risk tolerance of every unique organization is crucial. That's the key, because there are no two orgs that'll look the same ever.
Right.
And I mean, like, to your point too, right? Cloud offers a lot of benefits, but to your point, it's not the only way, right? Which is, something honestly that brought me to Juniper as well, because that's, converging networking security on-prem with existing, physical hardware, tangible infrastructure, is something that we've been doing for a long time, and something I was honestly super excited about, not just because I honestly, since I got into security, I have had this belief that security is everyone's problem, right? So security is actually everything's problem that facilitates connectivity, right? On any level. And so, if you're not into the cloud yet, fine. That's fine. There are, right, this you can extend enforcement to your physical network, right? And that's something that we've done and will continue to do, right? Not, hey, you must go to cloud to achieve these convergence benefits, to achieve this sort of, all seeing, all knowing, touching everything enforcement.
Right.
Do it with the infrastructure you already have and have had in place.
Absolutely. I think the line that says it best, Kate, is that we will meet the customers where they are on this journey, and those paths are significantly different, pending many variables. And so we have the ability. We're fortunate to have solutions that do address any environment type and requirements, no matter where that is or what scale that is. Including, these calls are certainly running across our equipment. This conference is traversing our gear, because we basically support almost a very large percentage of all internet traffic in North America and Europe. And so it's the benefit of knowing that the most demanding customers in the world also rely on our capabilities, our resilience, to drive yet another facet of what I would argue is critical infrastructure, right? You know, these communication lines upon which we live, and well, these days, you know, how many hours find ourselves working?
Yes, a lot. And I couldn't agree with you more that we are. I would argue from the get-go that Juniper was literally born into critical infrastructure. What, 24, 25 years ago, we were born into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my take on, or like my takeaway from this is that it's the power of the and. It's all those things that we have: physical infrastructure and connected security, so that we can get command and control addresses, you know, out to the network nodes, so they can take some load off of our firewalls. And it's SASE, and it's going to be some threat consolidation and anomaly feeds that you get plugged to my friends over at Dragos. Again, they're doing some very, very interesting work that will, I believe, be cloud-based, that is that aggregates the threat detection not only for a single utility, but across critical infrastructure sectors. So these are just, it's the beauty and the power of the and.
Oh yeah. And if you take that a step further to, you know, that people part of that trifecta, people are human nature. We hate change, right? Especially on the security side, and especially within critical infrastructure, right? You make a change, no, it's fine. It's not broken. Please don't fix it, because you're going to cause a million other problems, and I can't deal with that right now, right? And so this and strategy, right, using what you already have, and on the communication side of that people point and the triangle, you know, there's kind of a divide between technologist practitioner and executive stakeholder, right?
Right.
There's fundamentally there's a communications issue, but right, the technologist practitioner side, don't move anything, but also I want the newest. I need the latest and greatest, because that's going to offer me the biggest benefit, right? That's dollar signs. That's, you know, well, what about risk on the executive stakeholder side? But with an and strategy of using what you already have and maybe phasing in newer technologies, right? Proving them out, proving their the cost benefit analysis, proving out that actually they are going to reduce risk, they are going to reduce operational expenditure, and they are going to decrease CapEx over time. That's something that, you know, in any new implementation that I've ever been a part of, that has been the most successful approach, right? Speaking that common language, but then, you know, kind of take an inch at a time. Don't go for the mile, but take an inch at a time. And over time, you're going to have more headway than if you just keep going after that full mile. You're going to be banging your head against a wall for a very long time, because people don't like change. It's just who we are.
Absolutely.
Indeed. Well said. Okay. Well said.
Unless you're the CFO who loves to change his operational expense in a negative way, right? or yes, or you're the CIO who likes to see their cybersecurity incidents go in the downward trajectory.
Exactly.
So
yeah, but those two people have to agree, right? And one doesn't want to increase expenditures, where they want the downward trend
sure.
on the money side, but you know, there's kind of an inverse ratio that's happening, right? To decrease my risk, I need to increase my expenditure. You know, not necessarily.
Absolutely, not necessarily.
Yep.
The two objectives of Project Ambassador were to reduce operational expense and increase cybersecurity, and we needed to do them simultaneously.
Right. So,
you know, there's you could see white papers, as a matter of fact, describing Project Ambassador, which was recently launched as the Converged Industrial Edge at juniper.net. If you were to search for a Converged Industrial Edge and Juniper, you'll find access to white papers and solution briefs there. And you will see our friends Dragos and SEL both call it the same thing. We call it Converged Industrial Edge, and it's a combined multi-vendor architecture based on open standards, with the objectives of driving down operational costs and making your cybersecurity stance vastly greater than it was before.
And it does so at a scale that is truly magnificent. and thousands and thousands of sites. So
Yes.
it can do small, 50, 30 stations up through the largest operators in the world.
Yes.
So I think what was achieved is fantastic. It's truly amazing, and it's frankly an engineering marvel. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Easy to say.
Well, I know we're at the top of the hour, so I want to thank both of you for joining me today and on the challenge session. And thank you to Ali and Jordan and all the folks at siberX for having us on. We appreciate you guys. Thank you. And thank you, all of you. Thank you for the questions. Thanks for your attendance.
Yeah.
And I think Bob and I have our names here. And we're all over siberX's page. So if you have specific questions, please reach out. We'd love to chat.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, guys.